He set down his backpack, leaned his ice axe against a tree, and vanished. No scream, no struggle, just gone. That was the last anyone ever saw of Eric Lewis. What happened next would terrify even seasoned rescuers. Compasses spinning, radios dying, voices whispering from the trees. Over 500 man-hours, bloodhounds, helicopters, nothing. Was it an accident, or did something older than time take him? Welcome to Olympic National Park's Drift Zone, where people walk in and sometimes never walk out. Hit that like, and let's head into the forest. Just don't go alone. The sky above Olympic National Park was shifting. A moody gray slowly drifting in, blotting out the warmth of the afternoon sun. There was a heavy humidity in the air, combined with a strange pressure that could only be described as electric. It was June 21st, 2010, the day of summer solstice. According to old legends, this symbolic day is when the veil between worlds is said to become thin. Eric Lewis was a 57-years-old devoted father, a veteran Boy Scout mentor who loved the wilderness. It ran through his veins, warming his heart and soothing his soul. His family would later describe him as only truly alive when hiking in nature. He was one of those rare people who could navigate rough terrain by instinct alone. Yet somehow, while on a hike with friends, he simply, inexplicably, disappeared. It was supposed to be a typical summer summit. Eric and his two longtime hiking friends had set out to climb Mount Storm King, a peak that lived up to its name, commanding fear and respect among even the most experienced hikers. The temperatures on this day were a fairly warm 64 degrees at the base of the mountain. However, as the group climbed the steep, winding trail, wind chill and elevation brought the temperature to a rather brisk 43 degrees. As he made his way up the rocky footpath, he breathed in the beauty and solitude of the North Cascades. The humid air was heavy with the scent of the dark pine forest surrounding them. A tumbling waterfall in the distance provided background music to complement the stunning scenery. A piece of heaven bestowed upon the earth by ancient gods. It was now late afternoon, and heavy clouds now blotted out the remaining rays of sun. The vast stillness of the woods enveloped the hikers as they made their way up the last quarter mile toward the beckoning summit. Suddenly, without warning, Eric stopped. He calmly set his backpack down and carefully rested his ice axe against a nearby tree. Standing up, Eric glanced at his confused friends, giving them a small, apologetic smile. "I'll be right back," he said casually to his buddies. Eric gave a slight wave as he walked into the woods, disappearing into the dense pines within a few minutes. One of the men shrugged. Eric probably needed to relieve himself, so he might as well enjoy the brief respite before resuming the demanding climb. He sat on a nearby rock and massaged his sore calves while he waited for his friend. His companions chatted about the remaining hike ahead as they waited for Eric's return. But 5 minutes became 10 minutes, then 10 became 20. At this point, they started to grow concerned. What the hell was Eric doing? They called his name repeatedly, but the only response was their own voices echoing back to them, mocking their growing alarm. Reaching the summit became the farthest thing from their mind as panic set in. His friends searched the surrounding area, traversing the steep, jagged terrain, blowing whistles and yelling his name as they went. For the next couple of hours, they combed the area of the forest he'd disappeared into. They traversed narrow trails, lined with tree roots that twisted up from the ground like veins. They waved their flashlights through the darkening forest as the rain from the heavy clouds above spat on their futile efforts. By nightfall, panic was setting in. The mountain, once peaceful, now felt like a labyrinth to Eric's friends. It was starting to get rather dark as the heavy storm clouds had long since blotted out the sunset, and it became difficult to see where they were going. Realizing they needed help, as their search had yielded exactly 0 results, they made their way down the mountain and contacted park authorities. By dawn, over 60 search and rescue personnel were deployed to search for Eric. Rangers coordinated sweeps across the slopes where he had last been seen. Helicopters scanned the ridges using thermal imaging, but there was nothing to be found but cold rock and forest. Bloodhounds had initially picked up scents, but lost those scents within a short distance. For over a week, search and rescue teams pushed on relentlessly. Ground searchers used grid patterns and rope-assisted slopes. More than 500 man-hours were spent combing every foot of the punishing terrain. All of the trails and forests within 2 miles of where Eric had last been seen were thoroughly searched. Rescue workers slipped and slid on the muddy trails and along the rocks slick with mist. They traversed both hillsides and gullies, dense with second-growth fir and huckleberry. Morale dropped as the search through the ancient forests yielded nothing. The trees twisted toward the sky like hands reaching out in unanswered prayer. Heavy fog hung over the forest, as if mirroring the despair felt by the search party. There were no signs of a fall, no snapped branches, no tracks leading away, no animals disturbed. It was as if Eric had stepped into the trees and evaporated. His gear and ice axe were exactly where he'd left them. Other than that, the only thing the search team was able to find was a single boot print, deep in a patch of melting snow. Somehow, just a few hundred feet from the summit, with his friends right there, Eric had stepped away, and in under 5 minutes, he was gone. No struggle, no shout. He'd simply vanished into thin air. Unfortunately, Eric Lewis was never found, and his disappearance remains unsolved to this day. His case has garnered a good bit of interest, and there have been numerous theories floated as to what may have happened to him. The first theory is that it was an accident. It's quite possible that he tumbled down a rain-slicked slope or fell into a hidden crevasse. However, that area had been scoured thoroughly. Searchers insist that if he had fallen, they would have found him. The terrain wasn't bottomless. It was wet and rugged, but not impassable. Surely, during the extensive search efforts, a body would have surfaced? A second theory is that he voluntarily disappeared. There are those who floated the idea that he wanted to escape. But if this was the case, why leave behind vital gear? Why would he walk off into treacherous wilderness unprepared? Also, Eric Lewis was a family man. Why would he choose to leave his family without saying goodbye? The last theory seems far-fetched to some and downright chilling to others. Locals who are familiar with the park insist the forest there is cursed, guarded. Hikers have heard whispered voices and reported shadowy figures in the fog. Some visitors to the park say they've seen lights weaving between the trees before disappearing from view. Could there be a supernatural explanation for Eric's disappearance? In addition to these theories, there are other occurrences in the area that may or may not be related to his disappearance. Back in 2008, 2 hikers were reported missing in the same general area of Olympic National Park. One of the hikers was later found, however. They were confused, barefoot, and had no memory of what had happened to them in the 3 days they'd been missing. Is this just a coincidence, or is it possible that these disappearances are linked? There were also odd occurrences that were reported by members of the search and rescue team in the days following Eric's disappearance. Several of the people searching for Eric reported something they described as unnerving. One volunteer claimed they heard a faint voice while rappelling down a steep ridge. No more than a whisper carried on the wind. It beckoned him, saying, "Over here, come over here," but no one else was there. While the volunteers spent several more days with the search party, they never heard the voice again. Another rescue worker, who was a veteran tracker, reportedly grew disoriented just 50 yards from the trail. He insisted the trees closed in behind him and his GPS glitched out. Panicking at the strange turn of events, he frantically tried to radio for help, but received only static in reply. Fortunately, he was found an hour later, but he was confused, shivering, and swore he'd been followed. He wasn't able to say who or what had followed him. 3 days into the search for Eric, there was another odd occurrence. A park ranger noted something strange on his handheld compass. The needle spun slowly, steadily, even though there was no magnetic anomaly on the maps. He wasn't the only one who noticed this happening. In fact, the area around Eric's last known position was dubbed as the Cold Circle by the team. Their equipment consistently failed in this area. Drones lost signal. Radios sounded garbled. The forest near where the boot print had been found was described as oddly silent by all of the volunteers who ventured into the area. They mentioned that, unlike the rest of the forest, there were no chirps from birds or insects, just a choking kind of quiet that presses against your ears. The search and rescue team also reported that their dogs absolutely refused to go near a gully that was located quite close to the area where Eric had disappeared. But the bizarre experiences didn't stop there. In the weeks after the search ended, hikers began filing odd reports from Mount Storm King. A solo backpacker said he spotted a man watching him from a distant slope. The man appeared to be wearing outdated gear and a wide-brimmed hat. When the hiker called out and waved, the man slowly turned away, then seemed to literally melt into the trees. A couple of days after this happened, a group of campers woke to find boot prints circling their tent. The prints were fresh, single file, and in a perfect circle, leading nowhere. In 2013, possible evidence was found relating to Eric's disappearance. A hiking couple had veered off-trail during a storm and found a scrap of plaid shirt tangled in brambles under moss. It was faded, but seemed to match the same red and navy pattern Eric had been wearing on the day he disappeared. Feeling it may be important, they brought it down with them and turned it into the ranger station. However, it vanished somewhere in the Park Service's evidence logs. In 2015, a ranger on a solo patrol snapped a photo of the ridge for weather documentation. When the photos he took were later reviewed, the figure of a man was barely visible, partially obscured behind a tree. The man's face was deathly pale, and he had a blank stare on his expressionless face. He was not in the next shot, which was taken only seconds later. Due to all the unexplainable occurrences over the years, locals began to call that section of forest the drift zone. They insist it's a place where time slips and where people go wrong without realizing it. Where sometimes, the forest decides to show you something you're not supposed to see. More than a decade later, Eric Lewis is still missing. No body has ever been found. No real clues that could shed any light on his disappearance were ever unearthed. Not even a footprint aside from that single one in the snow. One day Eric was there, then inexplicably he vanished. And in between, something happened that we may never understand. Are the mountains keeping secrets? Are there forces we don't yet comprehend that are just beyond our view? Or did Eric see something he wasn't meant to see? If you were one of the people hiking with Eric that day, would you be brave enough to return to that trail? Would you notice if the wind stopped and the birds and locusts went quiet? How would you react if a whispered voice insisted that you come here? Do you have any theories as to what happened to Eric Lewis? Do you think he was involved in an accident? Or did he make a choice to disappear for some reason? Or do you think that something much stranger was responsible for his disappearance? Have you ever felt watched in the wild? Or been somewhere that put your senses on high alert and made you want to get the hell out of there as fast as possible? Leave your theories and experiences in the comments below. Share this story. Someone out there might know something. Or maybe you do. Don't forget to like and subscribe. We cover real disappearances, strange sightings, and the unsolved mysteries that still haunt our world.